a lot of these companies have so much money that they're sponsoring whole television shows, if not whole channels. And they're not even pushing their product necessarily. And they'll have ads, but it's not like this is a whole channel dedicated to our. The reason why I'm saying all this, of course, is in Mark chapter 5 and elsewhere in Scripture, of course, as well. There's all these healings by Jesus, which I don't have an issue with. That's great. Jesus is our Lord. God's with him. He's blessing him. But my problem is that a lot of people read these verses and they try to assume that we have those same skills, those same abilities, those same authorities. And that's usually one of the things that most people do not think about, and that is authority. It's not just whether we can do these things or not. It's authority to do these things. Because after the Gospels, the apostles will do many of these miraculous things as well, won't they? Won't we have healings and casting out of demons and raising the dead? And the answer is yes. So what are we missing? What do we not have? And a lot of people will say, well, you don't have this. Let's look at the text. Let's talk about the text and talk about what people think we need in order to do these things. And I would contend that they miss out entirely. Mark chapter 5, look at verse 21. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, If I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up. And she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, Who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, You see the crowds pressing around you, and yet you say, Who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any farther? But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, Do not fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, Little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. I want to finish this. We're going to come back to Mark, but we need to go over to Matthew chapter 9. We'll come back to Mark, but Mark doesn't give us this information. So we're going to go over to Matthew chapter 9. Verse 18 is the same account. Matthew 9:18. It's the same account, same situation. This is Jarius' daughter that's going to be healed here in verse 18. I want you to, I'm not going to read that because I just read it. Mark gives us way more information. Look down at verse 27, though, because Mark doesn't give us this and Matthew does. Matthew 27. And as Jesus passed on from there, two blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith be it done to you." And their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went away and spread his fame throughout all that district. As they were going away, verse 32, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, "Never was anything like this seen in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "He cast out demons by the prince of demons." Okay, so we're looking at some miraculous events here, some situations that have occurred. We have 4 miracles here, right? We first of all have the woman whose blood flow is stopped. We have Jarius' daughter being raised from the dead. We have blind men who can see, and we have a demon-oppressed man who cannot speak. Now, frequently when people talk about healing today from supposed men of God, what important factor is required for that healing to occur? Okay, you've put it reversed. They require you to have faith in order to be healed. And they will use, not all of this, they will use some of this to try to prove that point. You have to have faith in order to be healed. That's their contention. So let's slow down a little bit. And you're right, Laura, that is what they contend. Let's slow down a little bit and let's look at what the text actually tells us. So for this woman who's healed of her blood flow, what does she think is going to work for her? That's verse 28 of Mark 5. If I touch even his garments, I will be made well. Now this is important because who decided this? She did, right? And did it work? Absolutely. Now, did Jesus know that this was going to happen? Text doesn't tell us that. Joyce says, yes, he did. Okay, he was God, he was all-knowing. Now, some people have used that claim. Reading this, the text doesn't tell us that, right? You have to remember that he put aside his deity. Now, there will be places where he will tell us, hold on, Denise, don't be rude. There will be places that will tell us that he knows what's in men's hearts. He knows what they're thinking. He knows these things. And a lot of people look at that and they say, this is because he's using the power of God to know these things. We have to be more careful than that. Sometimes it's the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, that tells him these things. Other times it's, well, he's human just as we're human, and so he's going to know these things. Here in this situation, this woman, as she comes and she touches him, as you read this account, it's not Jesus knew that this was going to happen. As this account is relayed, it should be clear to us that he didn't, because of the way that it transpires. If he had known that she was going to do this, what would he have done differently? In my opinion, my question, of course, now I'm supposing something, but if he had known that she was going to do this, what would he have done? Because this is important to understand why these accounts are here. As he approached that area, so think, for example, the man at the pool of Siloam. waiting for the waters to be stirred. Jesus goes to that man and asks him, what? Do you want to be healed? And the man's response is, I have no one to help me into the water, right? So this is a man Jesus approaches. Here's a woman who approaches Jesus. Frequently, when somebody approaches Jesus, it's more direct. And we have to be careful, because maybe she thought that she couldn't do that for numerous reasons. She's a woman. She's had blood flow for years. That makes her unclean. She's not supposed to necessarily be in this crowd even. And she's taking this moment of desperation. We can't be certain about those things, and so we have to be careful. And I'm sorry, Denise, I cut you off. What were you saying? Right, that's verse 30. Who touched my garments? Now, Roper and others will contend that Jesus knew he was making the point, that Jesus is making the point so that the crowd could understand something that was going on. In fact, let's see. Matthew, who gives us less information, in chapter 9 of Matthew, in verse 22, it says, Jesus turned and seeing her, said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." So there is that contention that Jesus knew who she was as she touched him. That's not the question. The question is, did he know that she was going to touch him? I'm looking at Luke. Hold on a moment. Luke 45 and 46. I'm sorry, Luke 8, 45 and 46. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you, and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." So this is, again, this is something where his perception is not, I know this is going to happen. He just knows that it has happened. And again, this is important because we're talking about her faith. And we'll get to why I'm stressing this in the next situation. This is her faith. She thinks, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. And it works. Now, Jesus recognizes that power has gone out from himself. And he concludes the matter with her, going back to Mark 5. In verse 34, he concludes the matter, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, be healed of your disease." Well, she's already healed, but he's given that confirmation. She gets to keep the healing, as it were. But the next situation is completely different. The next situation is Jairus' daughter. How does Jairus' daughter work with Jesus? Okay, I heard your butt, but let's start with the beginning, which is she doesn't have the faith. How do you know? She's dead. Now, again, this is important because people will say, if you want to be healed, what do you need to have? You need to have faith. Well, here's Jairus' daughter. Jesus is going to raise her from the dead. How much faith does she have? Answered, none. Why? Because she's dead. Now, Joyce followed that up with the but, that is the argument people will have, the but, right? But the Father had the faith, right? And that's true. The Father had the faith, but he's not the one who was raised from the dead. And the importance, the significance is this. We could look at the woman whose blood flow stopped and we say, look, she had faith to be healed. And we look at Jairus' daughter and we cannot say she had faith to be raised. We can say Jarius had faith. So now we've stepped outside the realm of, well, you just need to have enough faith. Now it's something else, because now it's residing on who? The Father. Now it's somebody else's faith that's under consideration. Did he have faith? Yeah. How much faith? That is questionable, because he didn't come to Jesus to have him raise her up. What did he come to Jesus for? to be made well. Now, we don't know what what Jarius thought when he was told that his daughter was dead. Look at verse 35 and 36. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any farther?" Verse 36 gives us a but. Now, that moment, the servants, their thoughts, your daughter's dead. Case closed. We're done. We don't need the teacher anymore because he can't do anything, right? Jesus' response, we don't get the ruler. Jesus' response in verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." So Jesus gives Jarius the instruction, you believe. Does Jarius really think that Jesus is going to raise his daughter? We live in a time and place when people seem to think that just about anybody can do the miraculous. And that miraculous can be just about anything. But the raising of the dead is very, very powerful. Our doctors and nurses, they work really well with the sick. They can do great miracles, as it were. Not real miracles, but they can do amazing things. Healings, we just spoke about how Brad McFall is recovering rapidly. Part of that, obviously, is going to be his body. But part of that is also the doctors and nurses and medications and everything else that they've done to help him. But raising the dead? So Jarius has the faith, has the belief. And remember, in the Greek, belief and faith, those two are interchangeable words. So Jesus tells him to believe, which doesn't say he didn't, so I'm going to assume that he did. Now, the part that we read in Matthew, the next two accounts of miraculous, same time, same day. Going back to Matthew chapter 9, we have the blind men. Now, the blind men are going to chase Jesus down, aren't they? They're going to follow him. They're crying aloud, verse 27, chapter 9 of Matthew, "Have mercy on us." Verse 28, Jesus asks them, "Do you have faith, or do you believe?" The answer is yes. And then he says, "According to your faith be it done." Do you see the emphasis on faith, on belief? Do you believe? Do you have faith? The answer is yes. And it's really interesting because verse 30, when their eyes are open, Jesus gives them instruction. And what is that? Yeah, it's not to stop drinking tea with your spoon in it. It is to tell no one. Did they listen to his instructions? No. So they have faith for healing, but not faith for obedience. Can you imagine? I mean, the question of why not to tell everybody is interesting to contemplate. But Jesus gave them their sight and told them not to tell anyone, and they decided instead that they have to tell everybody because this is amazing. Yeah, how do you keep it quiet? Right, but that's quite a bit different from spreading his fame throughout the whole district, right? That's verse 31. So next, now they have faith. They chase Jesus down. They want to be healed, and so he heals them. Verse 32, though, we have a demon-oppressed man. Now, do you think that this demon-oppressed man had faith? Let's read the account again. Chapter 9 of chapter 9 of Matthew, 32 through 34. As they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, "Never was anything like this seen in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "He casts out demons by the prince of demons." Do you think this demon-oppressed man had faith? It doesn't say. All right. He was brought to Jesus. So we're talking about his friends now. We're talking about his friends. His friends had faith. This demon-oppressed man, he was mute. He couldn't tell. He couldn't speak. He couldn't say. Do you think the demon wanted to be cast out? No, of course not. So we're looking at somebody else's faith here, aren't we? So which is it? Is it your faith, or is it somebody else's faith? See, those who argue that you need to have faith aren't being honest with the scriptures. Turn over to Acts chapter 3. Acts chapter 3, verse 1. This is the beginning of the church. Not the very beginning, but the beginning. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour, and a man lame from birth was being carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, that is called the Beautiful Gate, to ask alms of those entering the temple. Seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked to receive alms. And Peter directed his gaze at him, as did John, and said, "Look at us." And he fixed his attention on them, expecting to receive something from them. But Peter said, "I have no silver or gold, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." And he took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were made strong. And leaping up, he stood and began to walk, and entered the temple with them, walking and leaping and praising God. How much faith did this man have? Zero. Sure? He was healed. He was. Is that what he wanted from Peter and John? Is that what he was expecting from them? He wanted money. Yeah. Well, Peter takes him by the hand, right? Is he going to resist? No, I got to stay down here. Look at verse 7. Let's look at how many times it talks about him getting up. Look at what it says here, verse 7. He took him by the right hand and raised him up. That's Peter. Raised him up. And immediately his feet and ankles were made strong. Verse 8. And leaping up, I thought he was up already. Leaping up, he stood and began to walk, and entered the temple with him, walking and leaping and praising God. And all the people saw him walking. Obviously, he is healed to the utmost, right? But I would contend he didn't have any faith at all until Peter picked him up and said, "Let's walk." Yes, Gentry. Very much so. Okay, Gentry's gone off on a rabbit trail. I'm going to bring us back, but I'm going to repeat what Gentry said for the internet. By the way, Dave and I have been working. Now, not only are we broadcasting live on Facebook, he didn't say we weren't, so I'm going to assume that it's working this morning. We're also broadcasting live on YouTube. So for those who do not like to use Facebook or don't have Facebook, you can watch on YouTube. But Gentry's question was, oftentimes we as believers who have faith, we pray for those who don't have faith to be healed. And if our faith is regarded or disregarded, then our prayers are useless. And I understand what you're saying there, Gentry, and that's your point is apt, but I want to stick with how people want to be healed, and not in the false doctrine that goes with the miraculous, and not the providence of God, which is how we believe our prayers are answered. So again, going back to this situation of, do we have to have faith in order to be healed? Some people will say it's the lack of the recipients. Now, this is tough, because when you get into, go back to Mark with me in chapter 6, and I don't want to give away all of this because I'm going to get into it in my sermon, but in Mark chapter 6, he's going to go to his hometown, which is Nazareth. He's going to go to his hometown, Nazareth, and he's going to do some things. Look at verse 5. And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. So some people read this and they conclude that Jesus, think about this, Jesus couldn't heal them because of their lack of faith. That's what people say. That's the conclusion they reach. The woman who was bleeding, she was healed because of her faith. Jairus' daughter was raised because of his faith. The blind men were healed because of their faith. The demon-oppressed man was healed because of his friend's faith. Here we read in Mark 6 that Jesus can't do mighty works because of their lack of faith, or the text says unbelief. It's the same word. Do you think that we are so powerful that if Jesus said, Scott, I'm going to heal you, and I said, no, you're not, that Jesus couldn't heal me? Because that's when people say you have to have faith in order to be healed. That's what they're teaching you. If I say I don't have faith, then I can't be healed. And they use this, they tell people this, and they get people to buy into their doctrine and their theology, their thinking. And I've met so many people that are tormented in their souls because they have faith, they believe, and yet they still have cancer, or their children still have this disease or that disease. And I met a mom a couple years ago. She prays. She has 3 kids. They've got autism, and she prays so hard, and she believes in God. They still have autism. Does she not have enough faith? Do they not have enough faith? Why are they still sick with their disease? This is the problem that we run into when we forget what we're supposed to be learning here from these texts. Bill? Oh, yes. Yeah, they don't use that much anymore. But yes, praying through the sin or the disease, depending on your afflictions, right, in order to be saved. Yes. I still hear about that periodically, but that phraseology, if you ever hear praying through, and it's in some songs, if you ever hear that theology, praying through, that's what they're referring to, is you're struggling with sin, or you've got a disease and you need to be at the front of the auditorium. They'll say church, that you have to be at the altar praying through, and then once you pray through it, usually meaning once you feel better about things, then you'll be cured. Mm. Yeah, I can imagine. Is this what is this a pattern for us to follow here in Mark and Matthew and Luke? Reading about these events where Jesus heals these people, are we supposed to be healing in the same way? Are we supposed to be looking to Jesus for healing in the same way that we read here in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Is that what these gospel writers are trying to teach us? That's the question that's not being asked. Why are these accounts here? Because oftentimes we read these, and I say I'm humanity, we read these and we think, well, these are here to teach us that we're supposed to be able to do the same thing. Either we're supposed to be able to heal like him, or we're supposed to be able to heal like these people are healed. And neither of those two conclusions are true. I'm not Jesus. I'm not supposed to be healing like Jesus. What am I supposed to be doing? What did Jesus do for these people that I can do for these people? That's the question we need to ask. So what did Jesus do for these people that I also can do? All right. Prayer is powerful. We need to pray. Don't skip prayer. But we don't read Jesus praying here. So let's not do that. Which is, okay, this is not about healing. Healing's here, but it's not about healing. It's about Jesus being the Messiah. That's what these texts are supposed to be showing us. These texts are not about, this is not about how to get rid of your asthma, Scott. This is not about how to make your eyes better, Scott. This is about believing that Jesus is the Messiah. These passages are here to prove that. So when we read these passages, it's not a how-to list on how to get well. You go through your New Testament later texts, and you'll find places where Paul, thorn in the flesh, he did all sorts of miraculous things. And he even tried the most powerful thing you can do to get rid of that thorn in the flesh. He prayed to Jesus 3 times. And what did God tell him? What did Jesus tell him? My grace is sufficient for you. Did Paul not have enough faith? Oh, man, Paul, you let me down. That's not the issue. Does Jesus not have the power? That's not the issue. Paul needed to learn about grace. And here we need to be learning that Jesus is the Messiah. So when it comes to the people of our world that are hurting, that are needing Jesus, what do we need to do? It's not healing them. We need to be teaching them that Jesus is the Christ. And that's hard because when a person is sick and they're struggling to breathe and they hurt from their cancer and they can't afford their medications and they see their little kids that are struggling with their own diseases and they can't walk and they can't afford surgeries and all of that business, it just breaks the heart. And doesn't God love us? The answer is yes, he does. He loves you greatly, so much so that he sent his son to die for you. They may not like that because that's not what they want to hear, but it is what they need to hear. And those Christians in the world today that teach, well, you just have to have more faith, Scott, to be healed, they are destroying people left and right. They're teaching a false doctrine, a false theology, and they're destroying faith. Well, I believe, and I've been to worship service, and I put money in the plate, and I study the scriptures, and I'm still struggling with this disease, Scott. Yes, I know, and it hurts me too. Jesus didn't come to get rid of our splinters. Jesus didn't come to make our legs grow long enough so that they're both equal. Jesus didn't come so that we could physically see. And what did he come for? He came to save us. And when we read these accounts, we need to get away from Jesus came to heal us. I'll talk about that in my sermon. We need to get away from I'm here to heal others. We need to get back to what Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and John, and every other New Testament writer was teaching us. That is, Jesus is the Christ. This proves it. If everybody could heal, and everybody could cast out demons, and everybody could raise the dead, what would that do with Jesus? Would it be so amazing? Would it be so spectacular? Would it be something to go, man, I wish I could do those things. Oh, wait, yeah, that's right, I can. Everybody can. Who's this Jesus guy? Everybody can do these things. We Christians need to be smarter than that. We need to read the text more carefully. And it's hard because we're talking about things that go beyond just, well, this happened and this happened. We're having to look at the why did this happen? What is being taught? Why does Matthew record this? And it's not because it's amazing. Why does Mark record this? Why does Luke record this? John, he tells us at the end of his gospel, if everything that Jesus did was written down, what would happen? There's not enough books in the world for that, right? These are written down so that we would believe. And we have accounts here of what? People believing that Jesus is the Christ. All right. Any last questions or comments? I came prepared, Joyce. Thank you. Yes. Next week, we'll be reading through Roper's commentary. Well, not reading literally, studying through it. Pages 410 through pages 436. 410 through 436. Thank you, class.